Okay, so get ready to travel back in time thousands of years
To ancient Jerusalem.
to Solomon's Temple.
A structure that still sparks debate and wonder.
You've given us quite the mix of sources for this deep dive.
Not just the biblical accounts, right?
Right. But also archaeological reports and even texts on Kabbalah. Seems like you want something a little more than just the Sunday school version.
Absolutely. I think what I find so fascinating here is this approach you're taking to this. From multiple angles, we've got the historical, the spiritual, even some archaeological sources. It really suggests to me that you're trying to understand why this temple, even just as a ruin, continues to hold such power over us, in our collective imagination, I mean.
You really hit the nail on the head there. But to set the scene, for anyone who's maybe only got a vague picture in their mind, can you help us sort of envision what this temple actually looked like in its prime?
Okay. Imagine a building
Okay.
of gleaming white limestone,
Wow.
all overlaid with fragrant cedar wood,
Really?
imported all the way from Tyre. We're talking intricate carvings,
Wow.
dazzling gold accents.
Okay.
And the height rivals many modern buildings. This was a true architectural marvel.
And to think that this monumental project was supposedly spearheaded by King Solomon himself, the sources you've given us mention him going all out, striking deals with King Hiram for the best cedar wood, employing an army of overseers, and then requiring round-the-clock labor from thousands of Israelites. This is no small feat.
It's massive. And it's actually the sheer scale of it all that has led some scholars to question whether the traditional timeline that's presented in the Bible is completely accurate.
Okay.
So while the scriptures do give credit to Solomon, there are some that theorize that the initial structure may have been significantly smaller, maybe even predating Solomon.
So you're saying it's possible?
It's possible that the temple that we picture, this magnificent structure, was actually the result of additions, expansions, over generations, with each successive ruler leaving their own mark.
So it's like a game of architectural telephone.
Yeah.
Each person adding their own spin to it. So the temple that we envision, this magnificent structure, this might actually be a fusion of different visions, each layer adding to its grandeur and its complexity.
Right.
But before we get too caught up debating the construction, I'm dying to step inside, especially into the Holy of Holies.
Okay.
This inner sanctum, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, shrouded in secrecy, accessible only to the high priest, and only on one day of the year, Yom Kippur.
Can you talk about what the atmosphere surrounding this event would have been like?
Okay. Imagine the weight of expectation. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, right? A time for the Israelites to reflect, to repent. But on this day, the fate of the entire nation, it was believed to rest on the shoulders of the high priest.
Wow.
As he entered the Holy of Holies.
Into the Holy of Holies.
To offer incense and to pray for forgiveness. This was a moment of profound spiritual significance, imbued with both hope and trepidation. And at the heart of all of this, shrouded in darkness and mystery, sits the Ark of the Covenant. Now, everyone knows the Ark is significant, but what always gets me are the conflicting stories about what it actually contained.
Right.
The sources that you shared mentioned the stone tablets, the 10 Commandments. But they also hint at these other interpretations, these things that are almost taboo to discuss. What's the story there?
See, that's where things get really interesting. You remember how you're interested in Kabbalah?
Right.
Well, some interpretations view the Ark not as a physical container, but as a representation of the feminine divine.
Okay.
A concept that's explored in the Kabbalistic idea of the Shekinah. This interpretation moves beyond just a literal understanding of what was inside the Ark. It ventures into the realm of symbolism and esoteric knowledge.
So we're talking less Indiana Jones and the Ark of the Covenant and more like ancient mystical secrets.
Precisely. It's about understanding that for those who believed, the Ark wasn't just a box. It was a conduit between the earthly and the divine.
That definitely adds a whole new layer of intrigue to something I thought I had a handle on. But speaking of intriguing, what about those miniature shrines that were discovered at Khirbet Qeiyafa? They sound like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Except they're real.
Except they're real, and they date back to the time of Solomon's temple.
They do. And that's where things get really exciting. So we've got these shrines, and while they're smaller in scale, they bear a striking resemblance to descriptions we have of the temple.
Okay.
Particularly the layout. You've got a main hall, you've got an inner sanctum, and it really begs the question, could these be miniature versions of Solomon's temple?
Oh, wow.
perhaps reflecting a common architectural style,
Hmm.
or even serving as prototypes.
So it's like having a puzzle with pieces missing.
Yes.
And those miniature shrines at Khirbet Qiyafeh are throwing in some intriguing curveballs. Does this challenge the traditional timeline at all? Or could these shrines have existed alongside a grander temple, maybe each serving a different purpose?
It's certainly possible. I think these discoveries highlight how archaeology can challenge our understanding of the past.
Right.
Enrich it even. Even when we think we've got it all figured out, you know, when it comes to something like Solomon's Temple, which we think is well documented.
Right.
But then we find something like this.
And then there's that ivory pomegranate.
Oh, yes.
The one that caused such a stir. That was initially hailed as a relic from the temple itself, wasn't it?
It was. It's a perfect example of how quickly narratives can change when we're dealing with history.
Right.
So you've got this pomegranate with this inscription referencing the house of Yahweh, and it seemed like we'd found it. A direct link to Solomon's temple.
Wow.
But then further analysis cast doubt on its authenticity. And now we're left with more questions than answers. Was it a forgery?
Right.
A genuine artifact, but from a different temple maybe? The whole debate just highlights how difficult it is to piece together the past, especially when we're relying on such fragmented evidence.
It's like every answer we uncover just leads to more questions.
It seems that way sometimes.
But I guess that's part of what makes this so fascinating. It's easy to think of these ancient structures, like Solomon's Temple, as static.
Frozen in time.
Frozen in time. But in reality, it existed in a dynamic world, a world with political upheaval, changing religious beliefs, even plundering.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Solomon's Temple, it wasn't some untouchable relic. It was plundered multiple times throughout its history.
Really?
By everyone.
By everyone.
From Egyptian pharaohs to Babylonian kings. And it really just speaks to the political realities of the ancient world. How even something considered sacred wasn't immune to the ambitions of rulers, or even just the times of war.
It really adds a whole other layer of complexity to the narrative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It reminds us that history isn't just about these grand events, but also about the lives and choices of the individuals that are caught in the crossfire. But even more surprising than the plundering is this. For a while, Solomon's temple was shared by worshippers of different deities.
It's true.
Can you tell us more about that?
It's a fascinating period, isn't it?
Yeah.
It challenges our modern sensibilities about religion, about exclusivity, because for a time, the temple, which was originally intended as a place of worship for Yahweh, became a space where different faiths intersected.
Wow.
And we see evidence of this in archaeological findings, in historical texts even. And it just goes to show how fluid belief systems were in the ancient world.
Yeah.
You know, how different traditions could coexist, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes not. But ultimately, they were shaping a very complex and ever-evolving religious landscape.
Speaking of contested spaces, it kind of reminds me of when I visited the Temple Mount. The atmosphere there was just so charged.
Oh, really?
With all these different groups laying claim to this one sacred ground, it really made me realize that the history we're discussing, it's not just confined to the past, is it? It's very much alive and relevant today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the destruction of Solomon's temple, it's a stark reminder of that.
Right.
Commemorated by Jews on Tisha B'Av, this isn't just an event in the distant past. This is a loss that is still felt deeply, even today. It shapes Jewish identity, Jewish practice, even today.
And yet, even though it's gone, Solomon's temple continues to resonate, both literally and symbolically.
It does.
There's a reason that it's mentioned in prayers, studied for its deeper meaning.
You're right. Take, for example, the Jewish tradition of praying for its restoration.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes about the temple's enduring significance, this longing for a return to a time of spiritual wholeness.
Right.
And then there's Kabbalah. Kabbalah interprets the temple's design as a map of the cosmos.
Wow.
Each element representing a different aspect of creation and of the divine. So for those who follow Kabbalah, it's as though the blueprint of the universe is embedded within the temple's architecture.
So for them, even though the physical structure is gone, its essence, its deeper meaning can still be accessed.
Precisely. It goes beyond its physical form, and it becomes this tool for understanding the divine and our place, our very place within the grand scheme of things. And that's not all. Even beyond its religious and mystical interpretations, Solomon's temple has had a lasting impact on architecture. You mentioned El Escorial in Spain.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many examples across cultures and centuries of structures that borrow elements from the temple's design.
It's incredible to think that something built thousands of years ago in ancient Jerusalem could still be so powerful.
It's amazing.
But it also makes me wonder, what does it all mean for us now?
That's the question, isn't it?
What relevance does a temple built for a specific time, for specific people, have in our modern globalized world? It's one thing to acknowledge how historically and architecturally significant the structure is, but it's another thing entirely to really connect with it. On a personal level, I mean. I gotta say, I'm struggling a little bit.
Well, that's understandable.
Yeah.
It's easy to get so caught up in the physicality of Solomon's temple.
Right.
The gold, the cedar wood, the sheer scale of it. But when you peel back all those layers, I think we find something that is deeply resonant with the human experience,
Okay.
regardless of your background, your beliefs.
So you're saying there's something universal about it?
Absolutely. I mean, at its core, Solomon's temple, it's like so many other sacred spaces throughout history. It represents this longing,
What longing?
this deep-seated human longing for connection, a connection to something greater than ourselves.
To something greater.
Whether that's the divine, a shared history, even a set of ideals.
So less about the bricks and mortar,
Yeah.
and more about what they represent.
Exactly. Think about it. People throughout time, we've always searched for these places
Okay.
where we can feel awe, where we can connect with our spiritual side, where we can draw strength from this shared sense of purpose. And Solomon's temple, in its time, it provided that for the Israelites.
Right.
And even though it's gone, that yearning, that search for meaning, for connection, well, that's something we're still grappling with today.
That makes me think about all the different ways that people try to find that connection today
Right.
in our modern world.
Yeah.
Through religion, through art, community involvement.
Absolutely.
Maybe Solomon's temple, even though it's gone, can still serve as this reminder that this search, this is an essential part of what makes us human.
And that the answers, well, they're not always going to be found in these grand gestures or these monumental structures.
Right.
Sometimes it's about looking inward. It's about finding those quiet moments, those moments of reflection, about recognizing that the sacred can be found in the everyday.
Which brings us to that final provocative thought. If Solomon's temple were to be rebuilt today in our world, in a world grappling with so much division, so much uncertainty, what would it even look like? And what purpose would it serve?
Now that is a question worth pondering. Would it be a replica, trying to recapture a past glory?
Right.
Or would it be something totally new? Something that reflects all the different beliefs, all the experiences that make up our world today, and then what role would it play
Yeah.
in creating understanding, empathy,
Yeah.
a sense of shared humanity? These questions, they're not easy to answer, but they're worth exploring.
It's like you said at the very beginning, it's all about approaching these topics from different angles, recognizing all the layers of history, the symbolism, even that personal meaning woven into every single stone, every story.
Precisely. And who knows, maybe by grappling with these questions, by just imagining what a modern-day Solomon's temple might look like, what it might represent, well, maybe we'll stumble upon some new insights into our own search for meaning, for connection.
Definitely gives us all something to think about. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. If you had the chance to rebuild Solomon's temple for the modern world, what would your blueprint look like? Let that simmer for a while. This has been another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the other side.